Las Vegas, 1974. The spotlight blazes down on the International Hotel stage as Elvis Presley strides forward in his iconic white jumpsuit, diamonds catching the light like fallen stars. 20,000 fans hold their breath in anticipation. But tonight would be different. Tonight, the king of rock and roll would face his greatest challenge, not from critics or competitors, but from his own memory. What started as a potential disaster would transform into one of the most legendary performances in music history, proving that sometimes our greatest vulnerabilities become our most powerful strengths. The International Hotel hummed with electric anticipation as staff members made final preparations for Elvis Presley's highly anticipated comeback performance. It was August 15th, 1974, and the king had been struggling with personal demons that threatened to derail his career. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, paced nervously backstage, cigar smoke creating ghostly spirals in the dim lighting. Elvis stood before his dressing room mirror, adjusting the high collar of his white jumpsuit adorned with golden eagles and intricate beadwork. The costume, weighing nearly 30 pounds, felt heavier than usual tonight. His hands trembled slightly, not from stage fright, but from the cocktail of prescription medications that had become his daily companions. The irony wasn't lost on him. He who had once moved millions with pure instinct now relied on chemical courage. "You ready, boss?" asked Jerry Schilling, one of his longtime Memphis Mafia members, peering through the doorway. Jerry's concern was evident in his voice, though he tried to maintain his usual cheerful demeanor. Elvis nodded, though his reflection told a different story. The face staring back at him showed the wear of fame, the lines deeper than they should be for a man of 39. Yet his eyes still held that spark, that indefinable quality that had made teenage girls scream and grown men weep. The sound system crackled to life as the opening band finished their set. The crowd's energy was palpable, their excitement filtering through the walls and into Elvis's sanctuary. He closed his eyes and tried to center himself, reaching for the meditation techniques his spiritual advisor had taught him. But tonight, his mind felt foggy, disconnected from the lyrics he had sung thousands of times before. As the final call came for places, Elvis straightened his shoulders and walked toward the stage entrance. The familiar ritual of performance began: the deep breath, the adjustment of his belt, a quick prayer to whatever cosmic forces guided his fate. He had no idea that within the next 2 hours he would create magic from chaos, transforming what could have been his greatest failure into an unforgettable triumph that would be talked about for decades to come. The curtain rose to thunderous applause as Elvis took center stage, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person in the venue. The opening notes of his first song began, and he moved into his familiar stance, hips swaying with the rhythm that had made him famous. But as he opened his mouth to sing the opening verse, something unprecedented happened. The words simply weren't there. For a split second, panic flashed across his face. The band continued playing, waiting for his voice to join the melody, but Elvis stood frozen, his mind grasping for lyrics that seemed to have vanished into thin air. The medication fog had lifted just enough for him to realize his predicament, but not enough to restore his memory. Instead of walking off stage or making excuses, Elvis did something that would define his legend. He began to laugh, not a nervous giggle, but a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed through the microphone and into the hearts of his audience. The band, confused but trusting, continued the instrumental while Elvis stepped forward to the edge of the stage. "Well, folks," he said, his voice carrying that familiar Memphis drawl, "it seems like the king has forgotten his own songs tonight." The audience, initially confused, began to respond with understanding chuckles. "But you know what? I think that just means we're going to have ourselves a real good time figuring this out together." What happened next was pure Elvis magic. He began to hum along with the melody, occasionally throwing in a word or phrase when it came to him, but mostly just letting the music carry him. His body moved with the rhythm, as if the songs were flowing through his very soul, and gradually, the audience began to hum along with him. The vulnerability he displayed that night was unlike anything his fans had ever seen. Gone was the polished performer. In his place stood a human being, flawed and real, sharing an authentic moment with 20,000 strangers who suddenly felt like family. His charisma filled the gaps where words should have been, and somehow the performance felt more intimate and powerful than any perfectly executed show ever could. As the evening progressed, Elvis discovered that his forgotten lyrics had unlocked something far more precious than perfect recall, genuine connection with his audience. When he couldn't remember the second verse of one of his biggest hits, he walked into the crowd, microphone in hand, asking fans to help him out. The response was overwhelming as voices throughout the venue began singing along, creating an impromptu choir that filled the International Hotel with pure emotion. "You know," Elvis said during a particularly tender moment, "I've been singing these songs for so long, I think I forgot why I fell in love with them in the first place." He sat on the edge of the stage, his legs dangling like a child on a playground, and began talking to the audience as if they were old friends gathered in his living room. Music ain't about being perfect. It's about feeling something real. The band, initially uncertain, began to adapt to this new dynamic. They stretched out the instrumental sections, allowing Elvis to interact more freely with the crowd. When he attempted another song and stumbled over the lyrics, he simply smiled and said, "Y'all sing this part, I'll catch up when I remember." The audience, now fully invested in this shared experience, sang with a passion that surprised everyone, including Elvis himself. During what should have been his signature ballad, Elvis found himself speaking the words rather than singing them, turning the song into a heartfelt monologue about love, loss, and the search for meaning. His voice cracked with emotion as he shared stories between songs tales of his childhood in Tupelo, his first time in a recording studio, and the loneliness that often accompanied fame. The technical crew backstage watched in amazement as what they had feared would be a career-ending disaster transformed into something magical. The audience wasn't just watching a performance. They were witnessing an artist strip away all pretense and reveal his authentic self. Cell phones hadn't been invented yet, so there were no distracting screens, just pure human connection in its rawest form. By the third hour, Elvis had regained enough of his memory to sing several songs properly, but the damage, or rather, the magic, had already been done. This wasn't just a concert anymore. It was a spiritual experience that would bond everyone present in a shared moment of beautiful imperfection. As the evening drew to a close, Elvis stood before his audience, sweat glistening on his face, his white jumpsuit now wrinkled and human. The crowd remained on their feet, having experienced something none of them could have anticipated when they purchased their tickets. What had begun as a traditional concert had evolved into an intimate gathering where the barrier between performer and audience had completely dissolved. "I want to thank y'all for being so patient with me tonight," Elvis said, his voice hoarse, but filled with genuine gratitude. "I came up here thinking I had to be perfect for you, but you showed me that being real is so much better than being perfect." The standing ovation that followed lasted for nearly 10 minutes, with many audience members wiping tears from their eyes. Word of the extraordinary performance spread quickly through Las Vegas and beyond. Music critics, who had been sharpening their knives in anticipation of reviewing what they assumed would be another declining Elvis show, found themselves struggling to describe what they had witnessed. This wasn't a traditional concert that could be measured by technical precision or vocal prowess. It was something entirely different. In the days that followed, bootleg recordings of the performance began circulating, though they could never capture the full magic of being present in that room. Fans who had attended began calling radio stations and writing letters to newspapers, trying to articulate the transformative experience they had shared. Many described feeling as if they had seen Elvis truly perform for the first time, despite having attended his shows for years. The performance became a turning point, not just for Elvis, but for live music in general. It demonstrated that authenticity could triumph over perfection, that vulnerability could be more powerful than polish. Other artists began to study the bootleg tapes, trying to understand how Elvis had turned a potential disaster into his most memorable performance. Years later, as Elvis's life took its tragic trajectory, those who were present that night would remember it as the moment when the king showed his humanity. It became a testament to the power of music to heal, to connect, and to transform even our darkest moments into light. The night Elvis forgot the lyrics but stole the show proved that sometimes our greatest failures can become our most beautiful triumphs. The night Elvis forgot his lyrics taught us that perfection is overrated, but authenticity is priceless. In our social media age of carefully curated images and flawless performances, we've lost touch with the power of vulnerability. Elvis's courage to be imperfect in front of 20,000 people reminds us that our struggles don't diminish us, they make us human. Ready to embrace your own imperfect moments? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that being real is better than being perfect. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the spaces between the notes we forgot to play.